FDIC, here we come. Visit the Fire store at booths 110 and 111 for Streamlight, MSA, Lion, Seek, and more. Plus, score free customization on any Box 31 FDIC purchase made directly at our booth. Don't miss it.
Hi, Chris Mc Loone here with Fire Apparatus and Emergency Equipment. Welcome to this episode of Moving Water. As always, my two guests for this are Bill Adkins and Andy Soccodato. Both, we'll talk about it probably before we're done, both frequent FDIC speakers, also on the Fire Apparatus and Emergency Equipment Advisory Board. So what we're going to talk about today, and I have to preface it because I have to make sure everyone understands, this is not a lead time podcast. This is not a cost podcast. However, we are going to be talking about rigs that are 30 years old or more. The reality of where we are as a fire service is that, there are a large number of fire companies that do have rigs, frontline rigs, that are 30 and 40 years old. Some of them are immaculate. Some of them are in perfect operating condition. But what I wanted to talk to you guys about today are those older pumpers, those older frontline pumpers, and to just talk about, and tankers as well, and to talk about, some of what we need to do, some of what these departments need to do to ensure that they're up and running. A lot of these, and what's kind of weird to me is when I think of older pumpers, I often think about the one I love talking about are American LaFrances. They were 1981 rigs. They were 1250 GPM pumps, and I always equate older rig with smaller capacity pump with pumps with less capacity. But right now, when we talk about 30 years old, we're talking about 1996. And that's not that old. That's not that long ago. And when you think about and this is all coming together, when you think about an 81 rig versus a 96 rig, already, you're light years ahead of where you were when you think about reliability and things of that nature. It's just, the natural progression of times, things become more reliable over time with innovation and evolution. So, when I think about, the fact that we purchased two engines in 96, they came in late 96, they had 2000 GPM pumps on them. So that's my long way of saying you can't really, equate age with, the smaller, the reduced capacity pumps. But in many cases, if we're talking about a 40-year-old rig, that may be the case. So really today is about talking about those older rigs, keeping them going, what we need to do to keep the pumps, maintaining their rated capacity, et cetera. But I guess just to get me started, like I said, I'm thinking about 30-year-old pumpers here. When I originally approached you guys about talking about this particular topic, I had 30 years in my head before I remembered that that's 1996 at this point. But is there, Bill, I'll start with you, to you, I mean, I'm not saying, it has to be like the standard across the board, but to you, is there an age of a rig that it's really just impractical to consider it a frontline pumper? I know what the NFPA says and I know what they recommend, but that is not the reality for a lot of departments that are out there. And I think that's something, that does need to be talked about a bit. But it, if this 81 LaFrance that we have, it still pumps, Andy has an 88 Mac, it still pumps and pumps great. He just sent me a video of it the other day. But does there get to be a point where it's like, no, it's just not practical to keep this as a frontline engine anymore?
Well, Chris, I believe that it only becomes practical is if we don't take care of the piece of equipment. If you look at the background of Andy's right now, it's 88 Mac and it looks immaculate. It's been taken care of. We're in an age, the reason that we have to even talk about this subject is because we're in an age where everybody wants the newest and greatest of things. And that's not always the case when you don't have that budget. But if we can take care of the piece of equipment that we have, and 1996 is, like you said, is not that old. But we have to keep an eye on those older pieces of equipment a little bit more than we would if it was a 5-year piece of equipment sitting in your bay. keep an eye underneath you. If you have an older bay that it's hard to tell if you had an oil leak, then put something under it where you would be able to tell that there's some type of leak. And if there's a leak, fix it right away. Don't let it fester. As long as we maintain this equipment, it can run 40, 50, even 60 years. There's apparatus out there in the country that is running as a first line apparatus at 50 and 60 years old. It may not meet NFPA, which we know it doesn't, but it still will get the job done, because the majority of our fires they're not, Andy, myself, and you, we talk about this moving big water. It's not always going to be the case on the vast majority of our fires. So to keep an apparatus that can flow 1,000 gallons a minute is very doable, as long as we maintain it and keep an eye on things that change. If you see something changing in that bay, let's fix that problem so that we can continue to use it. It's a lot cheaper to fix a valve than it is to buy a new piece of equipment.
Andy, how about you? You got a little bit of experience with this, although it's not a frontline rig anymore. It's your frontline rig for your training business, if you think about it, in many respects. Is there like a time frame that we really ought to be looking at it and saying like, no, it's time to upgrade?
Yeah, so the instructor in me, you've already mentioned it, Chris, right, is follow what the NFPA guideline is, right? I think the recommendation is 25 years now. But I also know in the reality of things, that's not realistic for a lot of fire departments. So, just understand that, like we're saying, it is possible to run a 30, 40-year-old truck. But in my opinion, it's even more important to make sure that the maintenance is up to date, because in the event that something catastrophic happens and, you do find yourself in a courtroom, that is going to be a question that you're asked. Why are you running a 40-year-old engine as your frontline piece, right? So, but to Bill's point, right, you can have a truck that is 40 years old. My rig's an 88, and part of the reason that I own it now is because the fire department was juggling with, hey, we have this nearly 40-year-old engine. Should we pour the money that it's going to take to bring it back up to frontline service? Or should we, sell the truck and consider whatever we would put into repairing it and getting it back up to frontline service, something that we put towards purchasing a new rig? And they decided to go that route. Personally, I'm happy they went that route. But, one of the biggest things for my rig, the biggest issues that it has is it has a steel tank, and the top of the tank is rotted out. So if I drive around with a full tank of water, I will dump a quarter of the tank right out the back, going a couple blocks. So feasibly, for a frontline fire apparatus, that is a major repair that would have to be done if I wanted to run it as a frontline pumper. They got a quote on that, and it was more money than they were willing to spend to take the body off, remove that steel tank, put a poly tank in, and then put the body back on. So it really just depends on, like Bill said, if you take care of these trucks, they'll run forever, right? And I think something else that is really important to understand is, where are we talking? Where is your jurisdiction, right? I know a place around where I live, a city fire department, up until about a year ago, their frontline rig was a 30-year-old engine. And they're a city municipality, the county seat in their particular county, and they were running this 30-year-old rig out of their main firehouse. It was running anywhere between 5 and 10 calls a day. That's pretty rough on a 30-year-old rig, right? That is probably not something I want to do. But if I'm in a really slow rural area where maybe I'm only seeing 50 calls a year, right? If I do the right type of maintenance, I can make an 1980s rig, do everything that I need it to for the majority of the fires that I have. So there's a lot that goes into it. If you do the maintenance on these trucks, right, they're made to run. So that's the biggest thing, having a good maintenance program in place. And like you mentioned, I'm running into some of that the hard way, taking care of mine. But it's fun.
Now, I wanted to talk about the pump specifically, and I did also want to talk about some of those PM items, those preventive maintenance items. But first, let me just get into the pump a little bit. When like I drive to a call, I pump, 10 minutes or something. I'm writing it down. We're writing down the engine hours, we're writing down the pump hours. How many, how many minutes it ran and all that kind of stuff. These are newer rigs, though. They probably will be with us for 15 years. Maybe we'll get up to 20 this time. I can't predict the future on that, but they're pretty solid. And it's funny. My most recent editorial talked about just having a plan. And when we bought these two, they were both at the same time. We had the budget to do it. And when we bought them, we said we want to try to keep these things even. So, and right now they've got about the same number of miles on them, have about the same number of pump hours. One's a little higher because it's our first out like attack piece. But as I said, fairly reliable right now. We're not, obviously they're serviced every year. We get the pumps done every year. But when you get into a pump that has been, 30 years running and stuff like that, things are bound to give out. When you think about your 88 or my 81, I mean, I know with our 81, the packing was constantly a problem. And as it got older, became more and more of an issue. I'm just thinking about things like that, but those are actual items. But are there data that we should be looking at? Is it pump hours? Should it be more along the lines of how many miles are on the truck? Sometimes those are tied together, although not really. Back in the day, they weren't really tying the odometers to the pumps or to the generators back then. But I'm sorry, long question here. What kind of data should we be keeping track of with a truck that's that old? Is it like, I guess, replacement part data? Like we're hitting this one all the time. Andy, I'll start with you. Did that make sense, or do I?
Oh, absolutely.
Do I, God forbid, have to try to clarify that because I'm not sure.
No. So, in my experience and dealing with some older rigs, mine in particular, right? That in the 80s, those 80s era rigs, a lot of them have pump packing, and I just ran into this with my rig, right? I had to replace the packing. I did it myself with another guy. It took us 7 hours to get the whole job done, and it needed it, right? So that is something that for these older rigs, it's important to understand that packing is an adjustable, replaceable part, and it's something that needs to be maintained and paid attention to anytime you're operating the truck. Where a lot of us now, when we're dealing with newer rigs, a lot of us are used to mechanical seals. So mechanical seals, there's no adjustment that the operator needs to do or that a maintenance person needs to do, and they're self adjusting. So if we're thinking that we're dealing with mechanical seals on a truck that is from the 80s and we don't do anything with that packing, nasty things are going to start to arise. We're going to wonder why it's leaking like Niagara Falls underneath the truck, or I can't prime or have a problem holding the prime. So with regards to specific data, I'm sure a lot of people know that they're supposed to pump test every year, right? And that is 100% true. We need to pump test these trucks. But what's really important from a data set point is taking your results from this year and comparing them to last year and the year before that, and then comparing it to the pump certification plate. That's why that pump certification plate is on there, so you can look and say, for example, I did the packing on my rig, and the next night we went and pump tested it, and she struggled to pass pump test. We looked at the data plate and we saw the RPMs that it needed to be at to when it was new to get its rated capacity, and I was like 300 RPMs over that. So that tells me that there's wear within that pump. The wear rings are probably shot. They need to be replaced, and that's due to age. So another reason, if I am thinking about using something like this as a frontline rig, like like its former fire department, they said, you know what, the amount of money that it's going to cost to replace this to make it a frontline rig is probably not worth it for this particular engine. But if I stay on top of this throughout the rig's service life and say, you know what, it's creeping up, we can get this early before it's a 40-year-old truck that we're debating whether or not we should spend money on. Right. So that's a really good set of data to pay attention to. I know the NFPA 1910 standard has a conversion within it that will convert pump hours into mileage and things like that. So, Chris, like you said, that's really important. I know a lot of the newer rigs, they will, whenever the pump is engaged, it automatically triggers the speedometer. The odometer. So it'll keep track of the miles, and it's doing that conversion for you. That's another good data set to have.
Bill?
Yeah, that was what Andy just says. One of the things I was going to recommend is to make sure you have that when the pump is in gear, that it engages your odometer. So you got to keep track of how much wear that pump is actually getting. Like Andy mentioned before, the packing, the seals, and the valves. Just make sure you're keeping up with them from day one. This is something that if you already have a 30-year-old apparatus, it's probably too late to keep up with it now. But when you buy that apparatus, if you are a low budgeted department, and at any point, any of us could turn into a low budget department, even though we may be doing well now, we need to take care of it from day one. So that when we do need to replace something, we're just replacing a seal or two instead of having to redo the entire pump. And another thing we want to make sure we want to do is, pumps they need to be cool. So what I mean by that is by taking care of the pump on those seams, by recirculating if we need to, that's going to help maintain that pump a lot longer, because we could take the two exact same trucks and run it like we don't care, and then run the other one like it's ours, our personal ones. And if we take care of it, that apparatus is going to last a lot longer than the ones where the firefighters just don't care. You got to take care of your rigs. I know it's not coming out of our pocket, but we need to pretend it is. Okay, so take care of your equipment.
Yeah, and one thing to add to that, just that Bill said, right? Understanding that, if we're trying to think about this and we have a 30-year-old truck right now, it's hard to play catch up. So really, hopefully the viewers are taking away from this discussion that, maybe you don't have to worry about this right now in your fire department, but this podcast and today's topic is really about, how do I take care of the rig that is 10 years old in my fire department that in 20 years might have to still be running, right? What are the things I need to do now for the rig that is newer so it can run in 30 years?
Now, Andy, take your truck for example. And again, I know it's not in service in a fire department right now, but I mean, you're maintaining this. When it comes to preventive maintenance, Bill, you just mentioned a few things that need to be done on a routine basis. But what I'm wondering is there an increased frequency in some of these preventive maintenance items that people should be aware of for trucks that are that old, just because they're getting older? I don't know if it's as simple as an oil change or something like that. Andy, are there things that just by virtue of the fact that they're older rigs happen more frequently, that need to be maintained more frequently, I guess?
So a good friend of both mine and Bill, Keith Thomas, he's a Columbus, Ohio fireman. He's into antique fire trucks and does that and everything like that. And he's been on the job in Columbus for over 30 years. And before I bought my engine, the first thing he told me, he said, if you're interested in getting into the antique fire truck world, the most important thing you have to make sure you do is change your filters and your belts and your hoses. And if you do that, these things will run forever. And that was the very first thing I did on my pumper when I took ownership of it. Right, it got a fresh oil change. I replaced the oil pressure lines going from the motor to the filters and everything like that because they had some age, and I didn't want them to split on me and then have a really bad day. Fuel filters, air filters. And what I found, and this is the nature of the beast, which ends up happening a lot of times. My particular rig went into reserve status in 2008. So it became the department's reserve engine in 2008. And as time went on, because it's the reserve, we don't play with it as much, don't use it as much, don't maintain it as much. And some of those filters that were on there were from 2008. So, she's the fuel filters, getting them off was fun. And once I replaced them, she drove totally different. So, doing just simple things like that. I know it sounds silly, that preventative maintenance, it makes a big deal, and they will run happy if you just do those simple things.
Is there anything that's more frequent? Even on the pump, are there seals that seem to go more? I'm just like spitballing, are there?
So the big ones for the pump, right, is going to be, especially for my aero truck, is the packing. So what I'm going to have to do and pay attention to is after I pump it, make sure that the packing is adjusted correctly. And if you've never adjusted packing, it is definitely an art. It is not something that you want to over tighten because you'll burn that pump up and burn that impeller shaft up. Obviously, if it's too loose, it'll be a mess. So adjusting it just a quarter turn every adjustment, and you have to keep your eye on it. The manufacturer, depending on the pump, it'll specify what they call a drip rate. So how much water should drip from that packing and that impeller shaft every minute. So definitely check that. Some rigs, like my rig, it has a data plate on it that says what the drip rate should be. So make sure it's within that range, and everything will be good. But the one thing, especially that I have found with my truck, is something that, and I'm not knocking the department that it came from. It's the department that I started with as a junior, so near and dear to me. But something that they did not do frequently is backflush the pump. And the mindset a lot of times is backflushing is really only something I need to do when I'm drafting or after I'm done drafting to get nasty water out of the intake side of the pump and clean any sand out of the wear rings and all that good stuff. But if you read what a lot of pump manufacturers recommend, they recommend that regardless of if you draft or not, even if you're a hydrant department, you should backflush at least once a month, because there's still crap that can come out of fire hydrants and all kinds of stuff. And I'm dealing with some of that. I have some rust and nasty stuff that has gone through that pump or has sat in that pump. I had to rebuild my front intake valve because it didn't get exercised or backflushed. So, just backflushing and exercising those valves, it'll make a world of difference.
Bill, any PM things that you found are need to be looked at more frequently?
Well, one thing, so what Andy talked about that during that time was something that is near and dear to me is lubrication. We're talking about mechanics of these apparatus. A lot of what he was mentioning there had to do with lubrication. So one of the things I do is lubricating the valves is something we miss. There's going to be some type of way of lubricating. Some rigs will have automatic lubrication devices, and some of them you have to lubricate manually. Even when you have those automatic lubrication devices, those lines will get clogged, and you got to make sure that those are working freely. Anytime we come back from a significant fire or significant training where we float a lot of water, we make sure we lubricate all the pieces. Any valve that we used, even some of the valves we didn't use that particular day, we lubricate it. And when the rig is sitting in the bay, we operate those valves back and forth. And we should do that with anything that's a moving part on that whole rig.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about the pumps. I touched on it in the beginning, and some of the older rigs, the capacity of those pumps are lower, but some of them are exactly what we're used to today. But we've discussed on this podcast before how you can get 2,000 gallons a minute, for example, out of a 1,500 GPM rated pump. Not everybody is a water wizard out there or a pump wizard out there. So for those that may maybe have concern about these older rigs being able to keep up with what our requirements are many times a day, and actually we did talk a little bit about those requirements a couple minutes ago, because we're not always trying to move like a ton of water, but if we are, what are the things that pump specific they need to be concerned about, to make sure that, they are at least getting what their rated capacity is. And also because there's so many different factors in terms of getting that 2,000 out of a 15. So I'm not trying to go into a super hydraulics class here. And, you have to have the water, obviously. But, for those who may be concerned that, man, this, who may be thinking because the pump is a lower capacity pump and everything else might be fine on the truck, but we're not going to get the water what are some of the things, what is your message to them to allay those concerns? Bill, I guess I'll start with you on that one.
Well, first, I would ask everybody, how often do you flow over 1,000 gallons a minute on your structure fires? It's not that often. In fact, the ones that you do, you can probably remember from 20 years ago. So the vast majority of our fires are going to be put out with less than 250 gallons a minute. So if you have a 30-year-old or 40-year-old rig that is a 1,000 GPM pump, it's going to be able to do the job 99% of the time. But if you do have that large fire, we always you just never know when you're going to have that large fire. It could happen in 5 minutes from now. Set up another rig next to it if you need to. If you're flowing that much water, there's got to be other rigs there as well, and have them help take that lead. And if we are dealing with a 30 or 40-year-old rig, most likely you're a department that doesn't have a big budget, so you got to rely on other things as well. So rely on your mutual aid to give you that hand, and then. By doing that pump testing, I guess to answer your question, by doing your pump testing is going to tell you if you're going to be able to get those GPMs out of there each year. And then while you're maintaining it in between that year, make sure it can flow that much. But use help. If you have that once in a 30-year, 40-year fire, get that other rigs, make room to get another rig up there to help you out.
Andy?
Yeah. So what Bill said is 100% right. My magic number with a lot of this stuff is 1,000 gallons a minute. If the rig can do 1,000 gallons a minute, it's useful, right? Because to Bill's point, how often am I flowing 2,000 gallons a minute on any fire, right? I'm not saying it can't happen. The question is, how often do we do that? And if the rig can do 1,000 gallons a minute, it's useful for just about any type of fire, in my opinion, right? Because if I need more than 1,000, like Bill said, I typically have other rigs having to do or split some of that work. In a lot of our classes, we like to show what a single rig can do. But here's what people have to understand. When I flow 2,000 gallons a minute out of a 1,500 gallon per minute pump, right, I'm stroking that rig out. That rig is working very hard. And if I have to do that for an extended period of time, right, that is just rolling the dice that a potential problem can exist or occur. So as a water supply officer or an incident commander, I need to be thinking about, the question is not, can one rig do 2,000 gallons a minute? The question is it efficient to have one rig do all the work when I could have multiple water supply pieces or something like that if resources and equipment allow it? So, I'll speak to my rig, for example. My engine is a 1250 GPM rated pump, just like we were talking about, Chris. And like I mentioned, because of its age and its history, it struggled when I pump tested it to get to 1250 at the pressure that we needed it to. So I redid the pump test. I wanted to say, you know what, at least can she do 1,000? So we did a pump test at 1,000. So technically I'm kind of derating her, and it'll do 1,000 from a draft, no problem at all. Right. And the picture that I have behind me, right, this was just the other day. We're flowing about 1,000 gallons a minute. And you'll notice over my shoulders, I twin tube drafted this rig. So a couple things to understand. Right now, this is the hardest that engine's going to have to work in a pumping scenario. It's drafting. It's not getting any help. I know that it'll do 1,000. I know that it'll do just under 12 from a draft, but 1,000 is where I want to keep her. Now, I also know that one hard sleeve is all that's needed to get 1,000 gallons a minute. But if I'm operating this older rig and I want to make it just a little bit easier for it because it's going to be there for a long period of time, right? I'm going to give it some extra help. I'm going to put a second intake in the water. Now the truck doesn't have to work as hard to get the water into the truck, creating the vacuum on the intake side and discharging on the discharge side of the pump. A lot of people will look at this picture and say, well, you don't need that for that volume you're flowing. You're right. I'm trying to preserve my rig. I'm trying to prevent this rig from overheating. I'm trying to keep my engine RPMs a little bit lower and still do the same amount of work. So that's how I can help it on the drafting side of things. A week before I took this photo, I was out pumping with it off of a hydrant. And I had another engine pumping to me through a supply line, and my engine was flowing 1,500 gallons a minute off of a hydrant. So what's important to understand is, right, drafting is the hardest. But if I put this in an urban environment where it's being fed by pressurized water, I'm not as worried. I can, as long as I can get the water into the pump under pressure and have a lot of intake pressure, that rig can get rid of that water a lot easier. So in a pressurized scenario, I wouldn't be as worried about using my older rig because it's getting help. Pressurized sources are help, right? The pump doesn't have to work as hard, and that's the advantage of the centrifugal fire pump, right? It takes advantage of incoming pressure. So in a hydrant scenario, I'm not as worried as about rocking and rolling as I would be with a drafting scenario. But again, the key is hook heavy, right? If you hook heavy, you get the water in, now you can make use of it. Bill?
I like to add something to that too. I have a lot of friends across the country that's always, they came to me and said, why are you doing twin tube when you don't need it? It's not because we're doing it to show off. It's to protect that rig. That if you do a single tube draft and try to pump the same amount of water using a twin tube or even a triple, the RPMs of that truck are so much lower. And you're just protecting the rig. It's all you're doing. You're not trying to be fancy. It's just something that helps maintain those rigs.
Yep.
Now, what about tankers? We haven't talked about tankers yet. I've been focusing more on, the Andy Soccodato style rig there. Probably more of a municipal rig, or, your attack piece that's, sitting in front of the house, no matter where you are. But what about tankers? They're a whole different animal. They don't all have pumps. So that's maybe one thing that you might not have to worry as much about on them. But, what are things departments need if you've got a 30 or 35-year-old tanker out there? What are some things they need to consider to keep them up and running? Bill, I'll start with you.
Yeah, with tankers, we had a problem with that here at Fayetteville a few years back. We had a fiberglass tank, and it started to leak. What are tankers for? Hauling water, right? So if it's losing water while it's sitting in the bay, that's not a good thing. So keep an eye out on those tankers as far as losing water. And the older tanks, like Andy mentioned, are old steel tanks where they may be worn out. Seals were around the dumps or something that you want to keep an eye out for. And like I say, we had a tanker that had a fiberglass, and over time that fiberglass started to separate. And no matter what we did to it, it would find a place to leak from. So we had to actually change out that tank to a poly tank without having to buy a new rig. We just changed out the tank, which was only $100,000 versus $400,000 or $500,000 to replace it. And that rig still is in service today and does fine. We had to spend some money to change out that tank, and we changed out the seals and all that, and it's just like a new truck now.
Yeah, so the big thing with tankers, older tankers, admittedly, they scare me a little bit more than pumpers. The first question I always ask when I walk up and see an older tanker, I want to know who built it, meaning was it built by a truck manufacturer or was it Jim Bob and Billy Bob in the barn back there that retrofitted a truck? Running 30-year-old retrofit trucks is not something that I will ever advocate for. I know money is tight, but from a statistics standpoint, and if you look at the data, those are the trucks that kill the most firefighters. So those are the ones that I want to kind of stay away from. NFPA 1900 and the old 1901, they have standards that list what the tank baffling has to be, how it needs to be baffled, how it needs to be mounted, all that kind of stuff. So, I know there's a lot of people that have mixed opinions about NFPA whenever you bring up a standard, but, with 1900 in particular, that standard is there to keep that tank from separating and crushing somebody or killing somebody and making sure that that truck is safe to go up and down the road. So, when I'm dealing with an older tanker, especially, I really want to know, was it built to whatever NFPA standard of the time? And depending on how old that truck is, what did the standard say? And is it still, considered to be safe going up and down the road? So that's the big thing for me with regards to tankers and older tankers.
Preventive maintenance on them, what are we looking at for that? I mean, are we just is it just more valve exercising, making sure the dump valve is I don't have a lot of experience with tankers, so I don't know, like, do those dump valves foul after a while? What are we looking at there?
Absolutely. The big thing, on more modern trucks, and like you see, like we said, this could be something that somebody listening now could be dealing with in 20 years. But today, a lot of trucks have pneumatic dumps, right? And I like the pneumatic dumps, but they have to be exercised. So if you don't exercise those, whether it's a 30 or 40-year-old truck or a 2-year-old truck, they're not going to work, right? So that is important regardless. And I would say the same for electric. Anything other than manual, right, or something that has a manual override, they all should be exercised, like Bill said. But if you take it for granted and don't exercise it, you're going to have a problem. One other thing from a preventative maintenance standpoint, and it jarred in my head for tankers, but it's true for engines too, or any apparatus. Tires, right? Make sure your tires are within date. And it's really important for your tankers because they're typically holding more weight, but the recommendation is every 7 years, regardless of the tread depth, you need to replace your tires because they dry rot, they lose elasticity, and you're more prone to having a bad day if you don't do that. So tires, check those tire dates. If you don't know how to do that, drop us a message. We can tell you, but there's a DOT code on there, and the last 4 digits on that code will tell you the week and year that tire was made. So just something to think about.
Yeah, if you drive down the road and those tankers and it's shaky at first and then it smooths itself out, it's time for new tires. Like Andy said, less than 7 years or 7 years or less. Another thing with tankers is your brakes. Andy mentioned we have more rollovers and accidents in tankers than we do in any other piece of apparatus. It's because they're holding all that weight, and the brakes will get what they call glassed over. So you may have plenty of pad, but because they got hot, they won't work as efficiently as they were. So keep the PM up on your brakes and your suspension. Remember, these chassis are sitting in the bay holding the weight that they're designed to hold, and sometimes at their max. So, we talk about, vehicles going down the road they're hauling a certain amount of weight. Well, these trucks always have that weight because we always have water in them. So that the suspensions get compressed all the time. It doesn't hurt to go outside and empty your tank, let them suspension rise and then lower back down as you put the water back in to put it back in the bay.
Originally, I was going to ask you guys about an ideal age for these types of rigs too, because they are a different animal than a regular engine company would be. But I think you already answered that in the beginning, Bill, and I think the same would apply here. That if they are maintained, and you're doing it right, then the age is not as much of a factor as the condition that I guess they're kept in. But having said that, they are different animals. Is there a different ideal age range for a tanker versus an engine?
A year rate, it would depend. I mean, how many gallons does a tanker hold? What type of chassis does it have? One of the reasons that we went with the big chassis here at Fayetteville is because we want them to last longer. If we would have bought the chassis that just barely holds that 32,000 gallons or 24,000 pounds, I said 32,000 gallons. If it holds 24,000 pounds or 3,000 gallon tankers, if we bought the chassis that just barely holds that, it's not going to last as long as what we did when we bought the big Kenworth or the Peterbilt that we have. If we would have bought a smaller type chassis that could hold it, it's just not going to last as long. So we bought the beefier chassis. But yeah, that's with us. I don't really have a year. It all depends. That's one of those things that it could depend.
Andy, same deal. Just depends.
Same deal. But one thing that while Bill was talking that did pop in my head that I think is it's worth mentioning. It might seem like common sense, but something else to consider is, if you're used to driving a 5-year-old rig, right, recognize if you hop in one of these 30 or 40-year-old engines, you can't drive it like you drive modern rigs. They're going to handle differently. You probably want to, as easy as it is for me to say, slow it down, right? That's the hardest thing that you should tell or ever tell a fireman, right? Slow down. But it's really important in these older rigs because they do drive differently. They do handle differently. They're not like modern trucks today. So that is something that is worth mentioning and keep that in the back of your head.
And I will add to that too. We've talked about this in the past when we're talking about tankers. Maybe you want to go lights and siren to the scene initially, but after that, turn the sirens and lights off, unless you need it to back into something. But, usually you're thinking about tankers, it's in a rural setting. We don't have traffic that you're trying to beat through. When a firefighter has a light and siren going on, it amps up their heart rate and they feel like they need to get there faster. Turn them off, do your water shuttle as needed, and only use the lights and sirens if you're hitting into some traffic.
So we covered a lot here today about doing these things. You guys kind of probably, I hope you have something else, but if you had general comments about keeping older rigs on the road, Bill, what would they be? Have we already covered everything, or do you have anything else you wanted to add about what it takes to keep an older rig on the road?
My comment would be to just keep an eye on it all the time. It's not something that if you have that older rig, you just can't ignore things. When you see something that's not 100% right, fix it then. Don't wait for it to fester.
Andy, general comments?
Yeah, my general comment would be don't neglect the old rig. A lot of people in their firehouse, they look at the older rig and that's a piece of junk. I hate riding it. It's beat to hell, blah, 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 blah. When I go and teach classes, personally, that's one of my favorite things to see is the old girl come out and actually show people what she still has and what they're capable of doing. So I know we all like to ride nice newer rigs, and they're more comfortable. They may be spec'd and laid out better, but don't forget about the older rigs, because they do have life in them. They will surprise you if you take care of them. And the worst thing to do for any truck is to just let it sit and rot and die. So if you exercise them, you drive them, if you pump them and do the preventative maintenance, they'll last you.
All right, guys. Well, that about wraps us up here today on this one. If anyone does have any questions for Bill or Andy, you can let me know. If you have any topics you'd like us to tackle, please let me know that as well. I'm at chris.mcloone@clarionevents.com. Both Bill and Andy will be at FDIC, so go to FDIC.com and click on the classroom sessions and the hot workshops. You'll be able to find their classes there. On the hot side, you will need to register, so make sure that if you want to attend that one, that you do register for it. Again, this has been Chris Mc Loone with Fire Apparatus and Emergency Equipment, along with Bill Adkins and Andy Soccodato. Have a good one, everybody, and stay safe. Thanks again, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.